Hi everyone, I'm Stan Mallow. Welcome to Paranormal Yakker. My guest in today's show is Nancy du Tertre. I'll be talking with Nancy about her book, How to Talk to an Alien. Many studies show that globally, most people believe alien beings have come down to Earth and walk amongst us. Have you ever given thought to how you would communicate with an alien should you encounter one? My guest will give the answer. Known as the skeptical psychic, Nancy is a securities litigation attorney who became a trained psychic detective, spiritual medium, and remote viewer trained in military methods. She's a magna cum laude graduate of Princeton University, is certified in intuitive Gestalt psychotherapy, works with law enforcement and victims' families to help find missing persons, authored many books, teaches various courses, lectures, and does private readings. Nancy du Tertre, welcome to Paranormal Yakker.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
From what I've read about you, Nancy, I've learned your fascination with the topic of alien communication came after a major sighting of a football field-sized UFO. Could you tell me when that sighting occurred, describe the spacecraft you saw, and what was your initial reaction to what you witnessed?
I was living in New Jersey at the time, about 30 minutes outside of New York City. I decided to go to a movie theater one night, a local place with my daughter, who was probably, I think she was around 19 or 20 years old at the time. And we went, it must have been an off night, but we showed up. It was the Cineplex was in a big mall. So big flat area with parking lots and low buildings, that kind of thing, and surrounded on both sides by highways, major highway, both of them actually coming out of New York City. So we go into the movie theater, we watch Woody Allen's Midnight in Paris, and which is all about going backwards in time. Kind of interesting with regard to what happened, when you think back on this. Anyway, so we watched the movie. It was a little odd. We were the only people sitting in our movie theater. There were about 5 different theaters or so, maybe 6. And the movie ends, we get up, we leave the theater, we go out. There's nobody, not a living soul in this lobby. Figure it was 11:45 p.m. But I've never seen it that empty, and I lived there for a couple of decades. Nobody working there, no customers, nobody at the concession stands. We open the door, we go out into the parking lot, and it was a very dark night. And my daughter, as we're walking to the car, she points up to the sky. She said, "Well, what's that?" And I look up and I see it looked like roughly 20 or 30 orange lights sitting in the sky. I don't have a clue. I've never seen orange lights. Usually, they're blue or red or white. They're not orange. I didn't know what that was. And because I'm a rational type of person, I start thinking, are they bouncing off of clouds that are low? And then, I mean, from lights being like searchlights sent up, I didn't know what they were. And no, there was nothing on the ground. And the more I stared at these lights, eventually I could make out what it was. It was, as you said, it was a football field sized spacecraft. It was sitting in the air. It was roughly 500 to 1,000 feet above us. It wasn't moving. It wasn't making a sound. It was boomerang shaped. And when I say boomerang, it was not a triangle. It was like, one of those, like you toss it. And my daughter was really terrified. She kept saying, "Well, let's go, let's go." And I said, "No, no, no, I want to see what this is." Eventually, as I'm staring at this, and now I can see the full outline of the craft, there's a white orb that telescopes open very fast, like that. And I figured it was about 15 or 20 feet in diameter off of one of the wings. It detaches. It starts wandering around like it's intelligently guided and looking for something. It was one of the most bizarre things I've ever seen in my life. It was light. Normally, if you look at light in the sky, there are rays. It doesn't matter if you're looking at street lights, stars, airplane lights, whatever they are, you're going to see rays coming off of the light. This was totally self-contained. It was luminescent and clearly outlined, perfect circle. Anyway, so it goes behind the craft, disappears for a second, comes back over the top of the craft, and then goes over and redocks where it came from. And just like it telescoped open, it telescopes closed, and then boom, it's gone. Again, my daughter is like yelling, like, let's go, let's go, let's go. I said, no, I don't know what this is. And she hung out with me, thank goodness. And eventually the wingtips disappeared, gone. Then the midsection of these sort of boomerang wings gone, and then the midsection gone. It's just gone. It either cloaked or dematerialized, but it did not fly away for sure. I don't know whether it was interdimensional. I don't know whether it was something extraordinary from some other place. It was very, very strange. Anyway, I did not think to pull out my cell phone, which I had on me. And I know, because I know many, many people who have had contact or they've been abducted or different types of experiences. It's extremely common that I think what they're doing, is they are blocking a part of our brain that would allow us to think about doing that. And I think that's for a reason. Anyway, so we drove home. My daughter's terrified. She figures, oh, they got to be following us. I said, no, no. And she starts to talk. And I said, look, don't tell me anything. I don't want to know anything. What we're going to do is we're going to go back to the house. We were only 5 minutes away from the house. And we're both going to draw a picture. We're going to compare and see if what we saw matches. Then we'll start sharing. So we did that. Yes, they were exact matches. I actually wrote a blog. I published the pictures on those. And then she wanted to call the police. She picks up the phone. I said, how about let's put that down for a second. Let's think about what we're going to say here. Well, I'm going to tell them, and I said, no, you're not. You're going to say something more like, has anybody noticed anything unusual in the skies tonight? So she did that. And of course, they said no. And for the next 2 years, every time that my daughter and she lived in Brooklyn, I was living in New Jersey. Every time we had a phone call, didn't matter, any combination of cell phones, landlines, anything, there would be a point where there would be a very cold electronic voice, sounded like came through a lot of wave distortion, sounded like male, but kind of weirdly creepy, and it would start talking. At that point, we could both hear it. Neither one of us could hear each other. We could only both of us hear it. It would talk to us in a language that I never heard in my life, and I'm pretty familiar with languages. Nothing. I couldn't make any correlation with it. And then it was when it would be done, once it said her name, but it would be done, it would hang up both of us simultaneously, and then we wouldn't be able to call each other back for 5 to 10 minutes. And eventually that happened with some of her friends and some of my clients. That's what got me very interested in ET languages, alien languages, non-human intelligence, as people like to call them now.
Yeah, titles for things, UFOs, UAPs, goes by any other name, it's whatever. At any rate, you and your daughter, so you did connect the sounds you were hearing on the phone to the UFO you saw. There was a correlation, a connection to that.
Yeah, because it began immediately. It went on every time we had a phone call for about 2 years and suddenly stopped. And then years later, I got woken up in the middle of the night by a telepathic voice. Now, that's highly unusual for me. It snapped me right out of his sleep. I know that voice. I would recognize that voice anywhere. It was the same voice. So I called up my daughter the next day and I said, I told her, and she said, well, that is really weird because she said, yesterday I was calling a friend of mine trying to leave a message on her phone, and that voice interrupted me. So it was using electronic and telepathic methods, and it was communicating to us in a language that I couldn't understand. And I speak English, French, and I've studied and speak a bit of German and Thai. So I have, and languages, even that if I don't know them, I can understand a lot of them anyway. Couldn't get a grip on anything. So, a lot of people think that ET languages are related to ancient languages, and I go through that in my book, How to Talk to an Alien. I run through all the different possibilities. And then if they were using some version of an ancient human language to communicate, maybe they learned it here, flew away for a few thousand years and came back. Even so, they've probably been around a lot longer than that. I don't think they would have kept it. I wanted to know, well, okay, so how does everybody understand them? You know, all these people walking around saying, yeah, ET spoke to me. Really? How do you know? What were they saying? How do you know that they were saying that? Well, I discovered there are different ways. So they're either doing it with actual sound and voices, they're doing it telepathically. They can do it sort of so that it passes somehow through your consciousness. You can express it through writing. What I discovered was there's no consistency here. If you're, let's say you're American, Canadian, they're probably going to speak English. Maybe they'll speak some French if you're in the French part of Canada. But if you are, what I was astounded was they're speaking in multiple languages to people who understand multiple languages. They even spoke in one instance to some people in Finland, where I think it's only 5 million people in the world who actually speak Finnish, and it is known to be, it's classified as the most difficult language for English speaking people to learn. They've spoken Finnish to contactees. The other thing that was really interesting was a lot of times people would report that they were speaking with accents. And so I kind of followed that through. Well, what does that tell you? There's data in knowing if somebody's speaking with an accent. Did they learn it on like how-to tapes when they were in outer space or in a different dimension? Were they living among us and slowly learning it like any of us would be learning a language if we live in another country or whatever? Were they learning it on audio tapes, somehow? I mean, who knows? But the point is, if you can identify the accent, you can identify who they were learning it from. And the wonderful example that I always give was in it's the Italian case. It was from the 1950s, and one of the non-human intelligences some of these Italians had actually met these ETs who claimed to be living in an underground base under the Adriatic Sea that was 200 miles long, which could expand and contract. But one of them apparently spoke with an accent that was like from way back, like how you would imagine that Mussolini would be speaking, which gives you a time frame, because if you go historically back into, like, if you're looking at the movies, if you look at, like, go back to like the 1940s or the 30s when they were just beginning to get movies, and the men are all talking like this, they have a little bit of a nasal voice and they speak they have a different rhythm. So they do stuff like that. If you add that in, that gives you a time frame. And then you put the accent, let's say they have an Italian accent speaking English. Now you have an idea that they have either lived there or learned it somehow through Italy.
What, Nancy, were your feelings or opinions of UFOs and experiencers, people who claim they had close encounters with the alien beings or even abducted by them and taken aboard their crafts prior to your own sighting of a UFO?
I could go through all of the crazy stuff that you learn when you are training as a psychic. All the crazy things you have to finally say, okay, yeah, that's real. I get it. The same thing, I did paranormal investigations for many years. Okay, fine. Now I'm learning about, like, oh, the spirits are moving around the room, they're throwing things, they're moving things, there's, poltergeist stuff, whatever. Okay, that's crazy in my mind because that's not what the world I came from. I went through everything. And I said it cannot get crazier. And yet, every time I've said that, it does. When I hit the UFO phase, I was afraid to tell anybody, because I'll tell you why. Because number one, I did not know they could be the size of a football field. I thought I would be laughed out of town for that. Second thing, I had no idea that there were a variety of shapes. You always hear about the saucers, that kind of thing, or at least in those back then you did. I never heard of a boomerang shape for a UFO. Never. It's still relatively rare compared to some of the other shapes. And since then, by the way, I mean, I've seen many, and all different types. But prior to that, I thought, whatever this is, I've bumped into something so extraordinary, I'm even having a hard time believing it. And I did not believe it prior to that, even though in retrospect, now I realize, yes, I did have, I did. I had, and that's, I guess, fairly common. A lot of people get that.
Different species of aliens exist, and they seem to range from greys, reptilians, and praying mantis types of creatures to humanoids who look like us. Has your research, Nancy, shown that one kind of species is more prevalent than the other regarding them visiting our planet and interacting with its inhabitants?
I mean, the classic one, I'm sure you know this, I mean, would be all varieties of grays coming in all different sizes, statures, facial shapes, head shapes, skin colors, that kind of thing. But that seems to be the most common. After that, I know people who've had a variety of interactions with different types. Other than, most people, if they're encountering, let's say the reptilians, they're talking about also encountering sort of MILAB or MILAB types of situations where you have humans working together with reptilian types. That's a special class of experiencers. I knew one experiencer who absolutely adored the reptilians, and she was attempting to learn their language. But I think that's unusual. Praying mantises, people, they seem much even less common than that, or the mantis types. They seem a bit austere. I have no experience. I can only tell you that as a little kid, 5 years old, I had a pet praying mantis, which I loved. I loved this. I used to feed it crickets, but yeah, it was not a mantis. But there are many types. I mean, you go with the Nordics. I think people have a problem with Nordics and even identifying them. You have hybrids, and hybrids of what? I suppose part humanoid or human, but how do we know the difference? I once encountered, when I was living in New Jersey, I go to the supermarket, and it's a local place. It was 5 minutes away from where I lived. I'm in the fresh produce section, and there's a very tall woman standing next to me. Now, I'm not that tall to start with, but she was abnormally, for me, tall. She was very elegant, and nobody was elegant. I mean, these were like housewives wearing their yoga stuff. I never saw anybody dressed like her in my life. She looked like she was something out of the 1950s. She was wearing it was like a white dress that was cinched at the waist with a big wide belt. It was white with big red, I think they were like red roses or big red flowers on them. And she had blonde hair. She's very beautiful. I said, would you mind reaching that, whatever that was up too high for me to reach? She said, yes, of course. I said, thank you very much. She said, oh, no problem, or whatever. And I said, do you mind my asking? You have a little bit of an accent. I'm wondering where you're from. And she said, oh, no, you've never heard of it. And I said, well, try me. And she said, Latvia. Now, I visited Latvia a long time ago. I have some idea what they sound like. And maybe she was Latvian. I don't know, but she was very strange for me. Anyway, so I take my one item, I go straight to the cash register, I pay for it, I get in my car, and I drive home. Now, normally it takes me 5 minutes. If you're walking, it will take you 20 minutes, maybe. I get to my street, I turn down my street, and the woman is walking on my street. She didn't have a car. And even if she'd left, she got there before I did. And I went straight to the cashier. So I do think that people bump into whatever they are for any number of reasons. And I don't know that people necessarily recognize them. A lot of people say, oh, yes, I can spot a NET, a humanoid, a Nordic, or tall white, or whatever. I don't know about that.
The beginnings of a number of major religions have aspects to them that could easily be interpreted as having been influenced by UFOs and alien beings. Could you, Nancy, tell me about one or two of those religions and what aspects of the belief system or dogma can be attributed to have been influenced by aliens?
I think the one that you hear about all the time is Christianity. And you go back to the Bible, and some people said it's sort of an ET manual. It depends how you interpret it, like anything else. So people talk about the wheels of Ezekiel. That's the most common. They talk about the Star of Bethlehem. They talk about the burning bush of Moses. There you got two. You got Christianity and Judaism right there. I don't know enough about some of the other religions to really say. I mean, other than certainly in let's say Hinduism, you have, I don't know if it's hundreds or even maybe thousands of different gods. And there are theories that if ETs were began, let's say, their rule, and I didn't want to get it, there's a very long history on this in Mesopotamia, in that part of the world. And then if they took the human women, created hybrids, the hybrids then are on a higher status than the lower, just regular humans. They then ruled. You can find plenty of stories like that. You go back to the Greek gods, the Roman gods. There are theories that they were initially non-human intelligence.
We inhabitants on planet Earth are of different nationalities, races, and belief systems, and speak different languages. Alien beings are no different. When it comes to how different languages came about, you have a unique take on the biblical Tower of Babel. Could you share that?
If I do, I know that I talked about that somewhere in here. I know I got a nice picture of the tower, but I don't know that my take on it is any different, other than the fact that if we try to get too close to the, let's say, let's just call it the powers that be, and you can interpret that any which way you want, that what the tower did is in being destroyed, it locked humanity into different languages, creating our own problems in attempting to communicate with each other. I don't know if that's what you're talking about.
How that all came about with the different languages, the influence of alien beings, how it came about. Because so many things we understand, so many things we don't know. So that could be a source of that too. I was just wondering what your take on that was part of that influence from alien beings who brought their languages or ways to us. I don't know the answer. I thought if anybody on the planet did, you might know that by that. People from various countries who speak different languages have claimed to have communicated with alien beings verbally, say they spoke to them in their native language. Now, yeah, you already brought out that when they do it, they do it in an accent. Do we know how the aliens learn to speak so many different languages and with the accents of the people who they are talking to?
I think it's because they have been able to infiltrate really well. I know that sounds difficult for some people to understand that. And for other people, it's like way too easy. Like, oh yeah, that one's an alien, that one's and I don't feel it works that way. I can only compare it to people have been talking since the whole drone thing that's been going on in New Jersey. And obviously, I have a lot of friends and colleagues they live there still. I don't. Even though the media is no longer talking about it, they say it has absolutely not stopped. And apparently it's also happening in other places around the globe. It's not just New Jersey, it's in different parts of the US, usually associated with different military bases. But the interesting thing is that a lot of people are now talking about the fact that things that look like man-made, either drones or airplanes or helicopters, they have seen them morph. Now, I don't know of anything that we can do currently that allows, I mean, I understand, of course, we have ways to shield and cloak things. That I get, of course. I don't know that we have something that allows the people who are looking at it to receive a different impression. To me, that implies a certain maybe form of consciousness manipulation. I don't know the answer to that. Maybe it has nothing to do with it. Maybe there's a technology that allows you to create something, but then you would have to match it to the people. When I was, I don't know, several years ago, I was out in Las Vegas, and a friend of mine and I decided just to go for a very, very long drive in the middle of the night towards Area 51, that whole area. And we're driving along, and there's nobody else out there. And I remember we stopped at a certain point because we were looking at some very strange clouds, even though they were somewhat lit up, even though it was night and it was dark out. But I do remember that we did see a circular shaped craft, and it was in the cloud. And then it suddenly morphed into a square shape. And that always struck me because I don't know of anything that can morph. Not like that. Not a technology like that.
For those experiences who said their communication with aliens was done telepathically while they were either awake or in a dream state, how did they describe the dynamics that took place between them and the alien?
Depends who you talk to. It's all over the place. It really does. I mean, one friend of mine, a long time ago, had said that she was asleep in her bed. That's sort of the typical, like, uh-oh moment. Typically, there are three beings that will show up, although that's not always the case, but that's typical. She said suddenly she opened her eyes. She realized there were somebody or something in the room. She sees the small grays. One of them comes over to her, and she realized she's completely paralyzed. The only thing she can move are her eyelids and her eyes. That's it. Everything else is paralyzed, and she was terrified out of her mind. And she telepathically begged this being to try to be kind to her, that she was frightened. She tried to explain her emotions and was sort of begging for some type of mercy or kindness. And she was appalled because she said this creature, this entity, had zero empathy, nothing. People have encountered that a lot, and I think that's what's made some people feel that some of these beings are some form of maybe robotic AI or something like that, because they don't seem to have a capacity. Although you would think that even the degree that humans have begun to develop AI, they're inserting signals for them to know when to smile, how to communicate nicely versus in different ways. But yeah, so you have people respond with incredible fear, others with incredible joy, and they get to do really cool stuff, maybe pilot some of the craft. They get to have conversations, be usually telepathic on board. It's just one of those like wonderful magical things. And then you want to go back and verify it somehow. Reactions are all over the place.
Aside from aliens communicating with humans verbally, telepathically, or in a dream state, what other methods do the aliens use to communicate with us? And on the reverse side, what methods are we humans using to contact our galactic brothers and sisters?
You probably heard Jake Barber's interview. So he was talking about, well, yeah, so he was confessing somehow that certain groups of military remote viewers were calling these things down using a certain type of telepathic means that he's calling psionics, which I also find silly. Everybody wants to make consciousness machine-like. That's all preparation for what's coming, by the way. According to him, they're calling them down, and then, of course, the military is able to shoot them down, and then they're getting access to crash sites and that kind of thing. I think that's not a great idea. It's a little painful to me because I do remote viewing and I teach remote viewing, and I also have been doing the equivalent of what Greer's CE5 things are, where you go out and you try to make contact. And I have always sort of cautioned people, and this for many years, be careful. If you're going to call something down, be careful about that. You don't even know what it is. That's number one. If you want to make a communication, that's one thing. If you want to call it down, that's another. And on top of that, if what they're doing is calling down these ships with a charade of love, I find that to be beyond abusive and not good for humanity, period, end of story.
A high percentage of contactees have said the alien beings they communicated with gave them messages to pass on to mankind. Have you, Nancy, found a commonality regarding those messages?
I talked about it a little bit. I quoted some of them in How to Talk to an Alien. The messages, I mean, I think that they're rather similar. Either we're being warned in a friendly way, saying essentially, watch out, you're playing with fire. Do something about it, either in terms of our military one-upsmanship or in terms of playing with the planet and turning it into this sort of barren dust bowl of human existence only, as if we lived inside our brain on this beautiful planet that's inhabited by many, many other things. So there's that. I think there are warnings. I think there's a kindness in that and an attempt not to interfere. That's the message from that. It's like, here's some information. We hope it helps you. Please try to do something about it. But nobody actively interfering on that. Now you have others where I think that they're attempting to sort of explore and find out, well, what is it like we're doing? Same deal. We're doing that on other planets. Our automatic reaction to that is shield it from the general public, siphon it off into a military zone, and then the military will figure out what to do with it. I can tell you one thing, when I've listened to some of these interviews with non-human intelligence, I actually was kind of astounded by the tone of the interrogators. And I realized, listen, an interrogation is an interrogation. You want to try and pull answers out where you can. But if you are in the attack mode continuously, and what they're saying frequently is on a very, very high metaphysical level of understanding, you got to think about it. Some of this stuff is extremely profound. You got to think about it. It's not like they're spitting in your face and saying, yeah, figure that one out. So I don't know that we have treated them with a degree of dignity that we should. And the other piece is I've seen many, many orbs. I've seen many UFOs. I've seen all different types. I know from a lot of what's now being released, it's something I knew already, which is that a lot of these orbs look like they're coming in so fast that it looks like they're coming in on an attack. What they're doing is they're generally not. Do pilots then make sudden sharp turns? Does it freak them out and they say, oh my God, and they end up with some serious accidents or problems? Yeah, that happens. But by and large, we're not being attacked. That ought to say something. The only thing that seems to be disconcerting is that we're being surveilled. Gee, I wonder why.
If someone is contacted by an alien being, how do you recommend they react? Are there any protocols in place or suggestions you would give to that contactee as to what they should say, do, or think in the case the communication is telepathic?
I have come across many instances where people who were conscious enough to remember their experiences, let's say on board a ship, and their interactions with some of the beings, a lot of them, even though they asked very important and good questions, a lot of times they got nothing back, no response. And it's a little bit of that sort of unempathetic or whatever. Maybe these are entities that have never had an emotion on their wherever they're coming from, and they don't know what that is. They don't know how to respond to something. If you're driving down a highway and somebody from the fast lane suddenly cuts you off, usually the instant reaction is to yell and scream at them. How dare they? You start swearing at them or whatever. And it rarely occurs to any of us in that split second moment, oh, maybe the husband was going at 100 miles an hour down the road to get his wife who's about to deliver a baby. Maybe somebody was sick. We don't think that. We don't give the benefit of the doubt. That's our nature. And one of the Reagan Department of Defense motto, which is trust but verify, I sort of slightly ripped that off into a trust and verify. But I absolutely believe that we ought to be behaving that way because we don't know enough about their interactions, their capacities, even though they appear to be highly intelligent. Maybe they are. I've also heard from various people who've had encounters. Some of them will tell you they're not that intelligent. They're limited. I think we have to be very, very careful about our knee-jerk reactions.
Should viewers of Paranormal Yakker want to buy your book, How to Talk to an Alien, learn about the other books you've authored, find out about the various services you offer and events you'll be at, how, Nancy, can they do that?
Well, very easy. Put it under my name, Nancy Tertre. They can go to a place like Amazon and find them there. Other than that, if they go to my website, which is theskepticalpsychic.com, that's a real easy way to find me and get in touch with me.
Nancy Tetre, I thank you for being my guest on Paranormal Yakker. Yakking with you has been the most enjoyable and informative experience. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. No, thank you for having me on.
Hi, everyone. This is Stan Mallow, the Paranormal Yakker. I hope you enjoyed the interview you just watched. So that you don't miss any upcoming shows, be sure to subscribe to my free YouTube channel. To do that, just press the subscribe button on your screen.